Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Inside ND Sports Podcast. I'm Tyler James, and I'm joined once again by the one and only Eric Hansen. Together, we cover Notre Dame football, recruiting, and more for InsideNDSports.com on the Rivals Network. It wouldn't be a college football offseason without the threat of constant change to the NCAA landscape. There's an NIL injunction, the threat of NLRB rulings of athletes as employees, discussions of changes to the college football playoff format before the new one has been used, and it's not even March yet. To discuss these topics and Notre Dame football, we reached out to Dennis Dodd, national college football writer for CBS Sports. Dennis, thanks for joining us.
Hey, a pleasure, you guys. Thanks.
Dennis, I want to start with the college football playoff because that's at least it's a little bit dumbfounding to me that they're already trying to change it before they've played. Why do you think there's such a rush to change the format already?
I think there's two questions here. There's that, and why is this coming so late in the process? Because I think part of the answer to this is Tony Petitti at the Big Ten, the commissioner, waking up one day and saying, "Hey, we've got 18 teams. We deserve more access. The only way to get that access is to expand the playoff." But we're now 2.5 weeks from that, ominous advisory group release from the SEC and Big Ten. And now, a couple of days away from, them now, I don't know what the verb is, demanding automatic spots and a weighted share of the future revenue in the playoff. So that's why it happened, because it's the same reason rock stars date supermodels, because they can.
Well, Tony Petitti sounds like the guy that goes to the all-you-can-eat buffet and then says, "I should have brought my stretchy pants." But
That's right.
I think, our audience is kind of wondering if any of this is going to lead to Notre Dame having a tough decision about staying independent. Do you see a pathway where this playoff format change could really push Notre Dame into a decision to go into a conference rather than having the decision to go either way?
No, I don't. When I first heard about this, that they were, interested, those two conferences, in automatic qualifier spots, I was thinking a 12-team bracket. And I would say, boy, that kind of puts the squeeze on Notre Dame unless I'm missing something. Well, what we were missing in bracket, partially for that reason. Yes, to get their AQs in, but more to stay out of court with a group of 5 and regarding antitrust and access, and to take care of Notre Dame. So unless I'm missing something, I think Notre Dame's going to have, their access is going to be fine. There will not be a squeeze on them in that realm necessarily to join a conference. Now, the pressure may come from somewhere else, but I think the biggest thing that people don't realize, or a lot of people don't realize, is their access point is so unique. They can never, the way it's written now, or at least the next 2 years, they can never get a first round bye, because they have agreed to do that as an independent. That was the trade-off. We don't play a conference championship game, so that's one less game we have to play. And we're fine being seated 5th at the highest in this whole thing. Now, you can see the incongruity in that. If Notre Dame finishes number 1, then what happens? And that's going to have to be addressed in the 14-team playoff as well. But think about that. Notre Dame could finish number 1, have to play an extra game, and be seated no higher than 5th.
Right. So I'm not sure that I've seen them playing with the format. I mean, just having done brackets myself, I know with 14 teams, you generally give the first 2 teams buys, and then everybody else has to play that first round, and then you're down to an even number. Now, we know in basketball tournaments, a lot of these conferences like to give a double bye to 4 teams. And then there are teams that conceivably have to win 5 rounds to win the championship. Do you think if they go to 14 teams, it'll be just the 2 teams getting a bye, and then bye for Notre Dame matters less, being able to be ranked higher, seated higher.
Yes. What's been proposed is the top two get a bye. And so then that leaves 12 teams to play 6 games, which would get you down to 8 in the quarterfinals, which is what you have now with 12. The skeleton is there. The skeleton is December, what is it, 20th, 21st of this
Yeah.
year. They will play those first round games and go from 12 to 8, only 2 games. They go from 2 to 4 in the first round with 14 teams. The bigger question is, where do you play those? The NFL is already reportedly upset that the CFP is playing on December 21st, a Saturday, and to accommodate 6 games, it looks like the CFP is going to have to play three days of 2 games each, at least to give it proper breathing room. And so you've got Friday, which is kind of awkward. Saturday NFL games. You can't play Sunday. That's the entire NFL schedule. And then Monday Night Football, I don't think you can play there unless you're going head to head. So it's going to be really interesting if they go to 14 where they place these extra games.
There's a rumor that Taylor Swift is going to be at the Notre Dame games to improve the ratings.
she's probably the best influence on winning football in the NFL there is right now.
Dennis, do you think college football should be concerned about the competition with the NFL? Like, is there a scenario where the playoff doesn't get as much attention as I think fans and the networks would like it to, because it's going up more and more against the NFL with the way they have to schedule it?
I think they should be really concerned because taken as a whole, this first 10 years of the CFP, the ratings haven't been great. They were really good the first year, and then in general have trended downward every year. Part of that was they were bound and determined early on to play on New Year's Eve. Well, that was a ratings disaster. I remember Bill Hancock saying people will tune in at parties. Well, you know what? Guess what? They didn't, by and large. So the ratings have gone down. I'm sure ESPN isn't happy with going head to head with the NFL. That's not going to help ratings. So yeah, I think there's a huge concern, but they've kind of painted themselves into a corner where, like, okay, we're going to do, ready, shoot, aim. We're going to do this. We'll figure out everything else later. And I just told you that a huge conflict with that first opening weekend if they add these 2 games.
So Dennis, as these proposals and discussions turn into actual bylaws or whatever, are the Big 12 and the ACC willingly going along with this, or are they having their arms twisted and don't really have a choice but to go along with it? Are the SEC and the Big 10 now so powerful they can just dictate?
Well, as we speak right now, and again, this is recorded and things could change 10 minutes from now. I think the Big 12 is on board in that, wait a minute, you want to give us 2 guaranteed spots? We don't even have that in 12. We don't have 1 in 12. Yeah, we'll take that. In the way that league is constituted now, I'm not quite sure what the ACC's mindset is. They may be against it just because of the automatic qualifier status. The rebuttal to that is, well, you're going to, no matter what the structure is, SEC and Big 10, you're going to get as many as you want anyway, at large, the conference champions only. You're going to get as many as you want. Why do you need the AQ status? And from what is near as I could tell, is that I don't think they trust the selection committee. They want to play. Look
After
at
last year, I don't
first
either.
game of the season. Well, I know, and I think that's a story that I need to write. USC plays LSU in the first game of the season in Las Vegas this year. USC is going to play a tough schedule in the Big 10. Well, what if USC goes 9-3, 8-4? And I'm talking about a 14-team field right now because for the next 2 years it's set 12.
Right.
With AQs, and they're being compared to a Big 10 team. A Big 12 team that's 10-2, and obviously doesn't play as tough a schedule. Well, that long answer short, they don't want to leave that decision in the hands of the selection committee. So what's the best way to do that? Just give us our 3. we'll be fine. Now the opposite of that, the blowback from that is, if this was in place last year, you would have had to consider Iowa in there. And that's really bad optics by any measure. Even though they won 10 games, Iowa does not deserve to be in a national championship playoff. So I think that's some of the blowback.
I'm not sure Iowa deserved to be in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I mean, that's not where they ended up.
Right.
My God.
No. But
I think you have
the
to
mentality.
I think you have to be able to score on a good high school defense, and I don't think Iowa can do that.
I'm trying to think of my best Iowa statistic. Obviously, they were last in total offense. God, I'm trying to think. There were 57 players. I think this is right. There were 57 individual players who scored more touchdowns last season than Iowa as a team. Something like that. It was unbelievable.
Dennis, circling back to Notre Dame's path in the future with this, it's not so much that there aren't spots available for Notre Dame, but I'm curious, like, if the conferences aren't willing to trust the committee, why should Notre Dame, and should the conferences have any motivation to schedule Notre Dame moving forward if they're going to be automatically guaranteed to have its best teams in the playoff?
Well, that's a good point. I think the mentality in the Big Ten and the SEC, the SEC, I'm told, is going to eventually add a 9th game, so that automatically improves their schedule. The Big Ten, as a conference, philosophically wants to play as many competitive non-conference games as they can, to the point that this was the case before we even started this discussion. When they expanded the bracket, it was going to make it possible for the Big Ten and SEC teams to get in at 9-3. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, I made that example before. They don't want to be penalized. 9-3, well, penalized for testing themselves. Because look, the rights holder is going to want better games, to the point that the rights holders may tell the Big Ten, look, you got to add a 10th conference game. I mean, go and look at Michigan's schedule this year. If you thought last year's was bad in terms of non-conference, it's horrible. And I don't know who it is exactly, but last year, what was it? It was UNLV, Colorado State, and somebody else, Bowling Green. And so the Big Ten as a conference philosophically doesn't want to have to do that going forward. They know they're going to have to play better games.
Okay, Dennis, I am going to take us out of the playoff and into NIL world. And there was the temporary injunction last week and basically suspending all the NIL rules that were illegal. I guess some people were still doing them anyways. Where are we headed with this? I mean, do you think this is going to be a permanent injunction and that it's going to be the chaos that the NCAA is suggesting it will be?
Well, big picture, we're living through the middle part of the transition to paying players. And this is just kind of the yucky, messy part in the middle. I've come to the conclusion now, like a year from now, we're going to have collective bargaining. We may even have unions. It's going to have to become a reality. I don't think it's that big a deal. I mean, we've had now 2.5 years of the NIL era to, examine what's gone on. It's been messy, but on Saturdays, people just care about the games. I do. I don't care if Shedeur Sanders drives a Maybach. I really don't. And the fans don't. They set record attendance at Colorado, record attendance nationally, maybe the best season ever on national television. And so we're just in kind of that rocky transition area. I can't tell you exactly what it looks like, but I think we've lived part of it the last 2.5 years. Bryce Young making $2 million a year, Caleb Williams making $1 million a year. And look, in the future, it'll be more regulated, because with collective bargaining, then you can collectively bargain. Hey, we'll give you X in return for you staying on campus for 2 years. And coaches would kill for that right now, frankly. Some sort of roster certainty. So I think in 2 or 3 years, we're not even going to talk about this stuff. Do you guys remember what a big deal, what was it? Not restricted earnings, but cost of attendance was a few years ago. People
Yep.
lost their minds. I was at an SEC spring meeting where coaches were losing their minds over the fact that Auburn players might get $100 more per month than Alabama. Oh, the recruiting advantages. Come on, guys. I mean, I've learned not to trust those reactions, especially when they come from coaches. And I think when this is settled down and the market applies, we won't, you know, the market will apply where there won't be many quarterbacks like the Tennessee kid, Nico Iamaleava, making $8 million because they won't all pan out. I mean, that's simple capitalist market economics. You don't throw good money after bad. So that will rectify itself. And then with collective bargaining and revenue sharing, perhaps as governors on the system, I think it'll be fine. I think there'll still be some purity to the game.
I think also a question for me, at Notre Dame, the non-revenue sports are a pretty big deal. Does football moving toward this model threaten the non-revenue sports in any way?
Yeah, I think yet to be determined. I would have to say the future does not look good in that if it comes down to it, to cut costs, because they're not gonna cut football coaches' salaries if they have to cut back. I think it will be borne on the backs of those minor sports. I know Title IX's involved. I know that, but cutting is cutting, and there's a huge burden about to come onto these schools. I think it's pretty much assumed that in some of these larger antitrust suits, they're all have the Power Five as plaintiffs. And we're at the point now where those have to be either settled or risk going to trial, which would be a folly, and have to pay triple the damages. So schools are getting ready to have to bear that burden, however that's distributed. I talked to someone the other day where they thought that particular money would be permissive from school to school, and that decision alone would be the decider in subdivisions. You either in or you're out. Okay, you're gonna be part of the settlement. Okay, you're in. You're not. You're out because you haven't shown a commitment to major college football by paying a class action antitrust civil rights settlement. Believe it, not civil rights, antitrust lawsuit settlement, which sounds crazy. But that's going to be the big differentiator, I think, in the future, because that's almost certain to come down, and it's going to have to be borne on the backs of these schools' budgets.
Dennis, have the NCAA and the schools lost control of where this is going? Will they be making any decisions, or will they just be reacting to court rulings and federal legislation that is dictating how they have to do things?
I think long answer short, I think they run a heck of a tournament in March. I think they'll have that. I mean, think about this, guys. They don't sponsor FBS football, but they have a tranche of money where they help run it, quote unquote, it costs $65 million a year. In any given year, 10 million of that is to litigate lawsuits. I think that's a big piece. Now that's great for the schools and not the NCAA, but whoever takes this over, if in fact they do, is going to have to assume some of that liability. So I think that's what keeps it, I don't know, quote unquote, alive. But they really do a great job with the basketball tournament, and that money is counted on by all the schools, the income from that. So I think in some way, shape, or form, they will be around. Maybe not just, obviously not how they are now.
Well, all right, Dennis, that's all we have for you. We really appreciate you taking time to talk to us, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
All right. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Eric. Be well.
Before we get to our question segment, I wanted to remind our listeners of our subscription promo for InsideNDSports.com. We're offering a 30-day free trial to our podcast listeners who want to try out a subscription to the site. That will get you access to all of our premium content, the Insider Lounge message board, and you don't have to wait for the next podcast to ask us a question. You can take advantage of this offer by using promo code NDPOD, that's NDPOD, when you sign up for a subscription on InsideNDSports.com. You can find a link to the deal in the podcast description or show notes. All right, now it's time for questions. You can submit questions to us on Twitter or the Insider Lounge message board before every podcast. I'm at TJamesND and Eric's at EHansenND. First one I have for us, Eric, is from at Charles W. Wolf. Can you break down the latest NIL rulings for us? My head is kind of spinning.
Okay. And, I think Dennis did a pretty good job of what the kind of big picture implications are. But basically, last week, a federal district judge put an temporary injunction in place that basically suspends the NCAA from enforcing its own rules about NIL, specifically about recruits, both high school recruits and transfers, from being able to kind of negotiate where they're going based on NIL opportunities, which is a big no-no. And at least now there's a window for them to do that. If this does not become a permanent injunction, they will not be penalized for doing that during this period. But the plaintiffs, it's a class action suit, so it'll affect all schools, not just Tennessee and Virginia. They're seeking to make this a permanent injunction, and the NCAA is pushing back and saying, this is going to create chaos or whatever. But as Dennis mentioned, big picture in our earlier interview, this is just pushing us further down the road toward athletes being paid. So this is just another step toward that.
Yeah, and the basis of it all is just that these courts believe that the NCAA is violating federal antitrust laws and in prohibiting these NIL deals from happening. So and threatening to punish them. So I think I don't know where it's going. I know that Dennis was talking about paying players and unionization. As someone who helped start a union, I know it is incredibly complicated, and you have to get a lot of people on the same page. And so, like, I'm very curious how it would work at the student athlete level, because you have at most players there for 5 years. Like, it's not there's no one there that's there for 10 years, right? There's just constant turnover, which there's some of that at like the professional athlete level. But there are some people that have more and more experience. So I don't know. It's just gonna be very interesting to see how that works, and like if it's school by school or a conference by conference in terms of how the rules are set up and all that stuff. But it does at least seem like we're heading towards something that looks like that, or there's going to have to be sort of a whole new model put in place that agrees with what the courts believe is happening. All right, next question is from Nathan Reynolds at Enforcers 2117. Do you think the 14-team playoff with the automatic qualifiers pretty much forces Notre Dame into the Big Ten?
Well, I thought that was a pretty interesting question. Just why I asked Dennis Dodd first to see what his thoughts were. I think, the question is, we don't know which format the college football playoff group is going to adopt. I would imagine that there could be evolutions of this that would put Notre Dame in a difficult position in terms of, okay, do we need to join a conference now? Access to winning a national championship has always been one of the pillars that would get Notre Dame's attention in terms of, we've got to join a conference full time with football. The other two are a media rights deal, which they've recently been able to extend through 2029 with NBC. And then it's a place to house their Olympic sports teams and basketball teams, which right now is the ACC. If the ACC were to blow up, that would again force Notre Dame to consider your question. Right now, as we look at it, it doesn't look like it would be. But again, we don't know what college sports is going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now, including the playoff structure.
Yeah, and my concerns are what I followed up with Dennis about is that I don't with more automatic qualifiers, I continue to question what the incentive for those conference schools to schedule Notre Dame would be. Um, I know there's obviously the one answer that always comes back to is money. It's like obviously a game against Notre Dame is going to be a draw. Um, but if there's such a draw or such a money pit that will be coming from this college football playoff, is it worth risking your path to that by playing one game against Notre Dame? Um, and then I think the other part of it is, and Eric was talking about how like I'm not sure that I would trust the committee if I'm one of those like the ACC or something. If the committee is by rule so beholden to these conferences, like what motivation will it have to give Notre Dame the benefit of the doubt when it comes to these rankings? Because I think everyone that wants to not be worried about this is like, well, there's going to still be spots left, and all you have to do is finish in the top 10. Notre Dame can do that. Like that's not unreasonable, but like you're not the one making the top 10. People that will by rule be influenced by conferences will be the ones making the top 10, and Notre Dame without a conference does not have that same poll anymore. So if all those conferences are being appeased, what motivation do they have to sort of keep Notre Dame involved other than their parents and grandparents loving Notre Dame? I don't know. Like I think it is concerning personally. Whether or not everyone agrees with me, I think it's different. But
I think what's going to be interesting too going forward is whatever you think about Jack Swarbrick in his days of actually being in the athletic director chair are in its final days. He has been an incredible influence for Notre Dame on a national scale. He's got Notre Dame not only a seat at the table, but he's been a driving force. He was the architect of the original 12-team format. And so is Pete Bavacqua going to be as powerful as Jack Swarbrick was in that realm? I mean, he may be great at running Notre Dame's athletic department, but can he make Notre Dame a player on a national level with all these changing forces? That's going to be a big test of his resolve very early in his tenure at Notre Dame.
yeah, and I think like the way that Jack Swarbrick made his influence wasn't just because he represented Notre Dame, right? Like that got him in the room, but the way he comports himself, the trust that people have in him, um, his belief or people believing that he has the best interests of college football in mind. There's a lot of things that go into why he was able to have an influence beyond just the fact that he was representing Notre Dame. So that's
And
where,
his relationships with those other
right.
athletic directors and conference commissioners as well.
Absolutely. All right. Next question is from MG Perez 0718. Are more changes coming to the football practice facilities? If there are, has any indication been given what that might be?
There are more changes coming, not necessarily to the football practice facilities, but to the Guglielmino Athletics Conference or complex. Conference. Everybody's a conference now. Complex, which is the main athletic building and certainly for football. And so what would the changes look like? So here's some of the more important ones. They would have more offices for coaches and support staff. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. More recovery space for health, for injuries. There would be the Goog does not have its own kitchen and it doesn't have its own dining space. So you have most of the players sitting together for dinner. You would be able to have all of them sitting together for meals. You wouldn't have to cart the meals in, cater them in from other parts of campus. You could actually do the cooking at the Goog. I know that sounds small, but these are all little things that all add up to a better football program. There would be study space and tutoring space there so that they wouldn't have to truck across campus, especially in bad weather to do that. They'd have kind of all under one roof. They'd also have their own weight rooms so that they wouldn't have to share it with the other teams. And in terms of time, that's really good. I remember, for example, people said, "Well, what's the big deal? Why do they need an uh, indoor athletic complex, Irish athletic complex? Why can't they just use Loftus Center?" Well, everybody else uses the Loftus, and so there were times Notre Dame would have to have team runs at like 4:30 in the morning. You could say, "Oh, that's good. That builds character." Well, yeah, it does. But the reality is you have a Notre Dame academic schedule and football practice on top of that. So being able to have it at a more reasonable time makes sense. And that would be the same way with the weight room.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything else to add. I think you covered it all. But yeah, I think the important distinction there is that it's not the practice facilities themselves. Like, I don't know that there's anything that will impact like either the indoor athletic center or um it's LeBar Practice Complex, I think is the official title, but for the practice fields that are parallel to the indoor facility. All right. Next question is from at Dan Quinlan. If you were Steve Angeli, what would you do? It's okay if he wants to go somewhere and start, but if he stays and Riley Leonard is hurt, he could be a key player on a great team. Plus, he would head into 2025 with a solid chance to start. Your thoughts?
I'd If I'm Steve Angeli, I'm going through spring practice. I'm competing for that starting job. And then I would kind of reassess when I got done with spring football. And he would still have, by the time the gold game is played, he'd have about 10 days to jump in the portal if he really wanted to. There are some things that I would consider if I'm Steve. First of all, not only is he competing against Riley Leonard, there are two very good prospects behind him and chasing him. Is he still solidly number two coming out of spring, or did one of those guys make a move and now they are challenging him? I would also ask myself, can I continue to develop at a high rate as a backup? He certainly did in 2023. And then how important is the ND degree and the ND life to him? Steve Angeli talked about this some the last time we had him in a media session about how unique Notre Dame is and how much it means to him. Now, he didn't say, and nothing is going to change that, but I know it means a lot to him. And then the last thing is, does he realistically see himself as an NFL quarterback? If he doesn't, then I think, and most guys do, whether they are or not.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't, I mean, if he's more realistic and he said, you know what, I'm willing to roll the dice in, injuries and in being able to beat out um, Kenny Minchie and CJ Carr in 2025. I'm looking at the bigger picture. I think Notre Dame is more important to me than, this pipe dream of being an NFL quarterback going through Rutgers to get there or whatever. Um, so I think those are all on the table. Those are all the questions that I would ask myself. And I think I would conclude, just looking at through Steve Angeli's lens and what I know of him, I would stay. I would bet on myself and stay through 2024. You could always jump in after the season, into the portal after the season if things didn't work out the way you wanted.
Yeah, I struggle with it because I understand and appreciate the value of a Notre Dame degree. I'm speaking from my perspective here, but you only get so much time to maximize yourself as a college football player, and then whether or not that leads to being a professional football player. You could always come back and be a Notre Dame student. Um, and so like I just it's really hard. Like if you really don't think that you're being given a fair shake and that yeah, they're gonna tell me, well, I could start next season. It's like, well, you've already passed on me twice. What make like fool me once, shame on me, fool me or shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Like do you really trust that that opportunity to start is going to be given to you? So I would understand the want to get out of there. Um, I think I would probably stay and graduate because you still would have years of eligibility left. Um, but the clock is ticking. And I mean, if Steve Angeli doesn't get a chance to play this year, like wouldn't right now be his highest value coming off of the Sun Bowl? Like, is he going to have a better market next year in the portal than he would this year? Now, the problem is like most of the quarterback situations are probably settled by now. Like, I think the winter transfer window is the more ideal time to transfer if you're going to try to be the presumptive starter at the next school you're going to. Um, so I think I don't know that he would be given any advantages by transferring this summer. But maybe there's a place that he felt like, well, even if I don't start this fall, then I'm at least in a better spot going into next year at whatever school that is than Notre Dame. I don't know that makes a lot of sense to me. So I would probably graduate and leave, but I certainly um, could see the reasoning behind getting out of here and trying to maximize the years you have available to play college football, and trying to get on the playing field.
And right now, there's an injunction that allows other schools to poach him to try to recruit him off the Notre Dame roster.
Exactly. All right. Our last question is for Marie Biafore at Biafore_Marie. Now that Devin Williams is off the table for Notre Dame, for each of you, who are the top 3 must-get recruits for the class of 2025? Also, yes or no, does Deuce Knight sign with Notre Dame next December?
Well, Tyler scolded me on what constitutes a must get. Has to be a gettable recruit, but I'm going to stay with my own thing since I'm not in the weeds like he is anyway. So my answers are going to be stupider than his are. So I'm going to go with, is it Talon Taylor? Is that how you say his first name?
You know what? I'm not 100% certain, but I think that's how I'd say it.
Okay. I'm going to go with him at wide receiver because I think he's an elite speed guy. I'm going to go with Nathaniel Owusu Boateng, which I was scolded for last time. And if he's not gettable enough, then I'll go with Tony Saka at linebacker. And then I'm going to go with
Anthony, Tony's his dad.
Yeah, well, get Tony too. Anthony Saka. And then I'm going to go with Damian Shanklin, the defensive end from Indianapolis. I'll go with him as my third guy.
Yeah, I think the last time we were asked by Marie to give must-gets was before the junior day. The 3 that I had on my list then were Owen Strebig, Mark Zachary, the cornerback out of Ben Davis in Indianapolis, and then cornerback Dallas Golden out of Tampa. Owen Strebig has committed to Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame still has good chances with Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden. I have future casting
Mark
for Notre Dame.
Zachary just announced his top 4 today.
Yeah, while we were recording our podcast, and it includes Notre Dame, to no surprise, as I mentioned that they almost be guaranteed to, in the heat index that published Thursday morning on the Insider Lounge. And so I'm going to keep Mark Zachary on that list. Damian Shanklin, the defensive end you mentioned, is also on my list. And I have a receiver.
Yeah.
I also have a receiver, but my receiver is Derek Meadows. I think those are the must gets. I think it's really
Derek
important.
made a huge jump in the rivals rankings.
Yeah, and he is someone that Notre Dame feels good about, but his the competition is heating up because he got all kinds of SEC offers now, and teams are coming around to the Derek Meadows hype train. Whereas Notre Dame was ahead of the curve with an offer last June. So, interestingly, Marie mentioned Devin Williams, who committed to Auburn this week. I actually had a note on the heat index today for our Inside ND Sports subscribers about him that I would encourage people to check out if they haven't read the heat index yet that was posted this morning. So
the
check
heat
that out.
index is awesome. I think it's the best thing we have on our paywall side and on our free side. I think it's the coolest thing because it really gets you up to date on where Notre Dame stands on every position with every prospect. And so you're not reading about these extraneous prospects that really aren't involved and so forth. I love it. I would subscribe just for that.
Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. And hopefully that convinces some others to do the same, because it is a lot of work, and it is something that we constantly update. Like we've been unveiling the 2025 heat index, which um, didn't actually come to like May last year when we first did it for the 2024 class, but they're so far along in the class. It's like, man, we better get this out there. They're gonna be done by the time if we wait till May. So so narrowing the focus of these are the guys that matter the most right now, and obviously it can change, and we will update the position as it evolves. And then as for Deuce Knight, I will say yes on Deuce Knight until he visits somewhere else. But if he does visit somewhere else, then I would say all bets are off. The other schools are coming after him, like Alabama and Mississippi, and we'll see if any of them are able to get him on campus. I wouldn't rule it out that he visits those schools, but right now I would be betting on yes that he will sign with Notre Dame.
I think he's going to see the difference that Mike Denbrock can make in an offense too, and that's going to make Notre Dame even more attractive for him.
All right, that is it for today's episode of the Inside Indy Sports Podcast. If you don't already, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other popular podcast platforms. If you like what you hear, give us a star rating, leave a review, and share our podcast feed with the person you know who runs the fastest 40-yard dash. As I mentioned earlier, we're offering a 30-day free trial to our podcast listeners who want to try out a subscription to InsideNDSports.com. That'll get you access to the heat index that Eric so kindly plugged for us. So please take advantage of that with the code NDPOD. That's NDPOD. I will be heading down to the NFL Combine for a couple days. So I'm interested to see how the Notre Dame participants do. That will give us some more stuff to talk about Monday on Football Never Sleeps over on YouTube, and we'll be getting into Notre Dame spring practices, the first one at least next week, and we'll have plenty of coverage coming your way on that. So until then, stick with InsideNDSports.com for all your Notre Dame coverage needs.